This is the United States Energy Association Power Sector Podcast, sponsored by the Natural Gas Supply Association. I'm Herman K. Trabish. I've covered the power sector since 2006, and I currently report for Utility Dive. In this episode of the USEA Power Sector Podcast series on natural gas issues, we're going to talk with Branko Milicevic, Secretary of the United Nations Group of Experts on Gas. Branko is going to describe global perspective on the rising focus on natural gas for power generation and for fuel as the world still seeks to address its changing climate. Branko's been a United Nations Economic Affairs Officer for almost 15 years and Secretary of the Group of Experts on Gas, which is part of the UN's European Commission Committee on Sustainable Energy. Before that, he was a Sustainable Development Officer and then a statistician with the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and his private sector background is as a chemical engineer and in development and commercialization of hydrogen fuel cells. So, Branko, what resources do you see as needed to meet the world's near-term demand growth, driven, of course, by electrification and especially by the AI data center consumption? And what role will the U.S. and the global natural gas supply play in that demand? Meeting that demand.
Thank you, Herman. I will try to provide you with some European perspective because I know USEA is often US-centric, and I'll say a few words about how the things look, from in the world beyond the US. First of all, the big picture. Indeed, as you rightly said, the electrification of the end use and the artificial intelligence are the things that drive demand growth. There is no question about it globally. According to the International Energy Agency, for example, in China and India, in last year, power demand rose is still rising at some 6 to 7% annually, and this is expected to go 2027 and beyond. In the US, I believe the growth is about between 2 and 3% last year, and Europe, that was down for COVID and other reasons, is slowly recovering to growth, though modest, about maybe 1 to 2%. However, the demand growth is good, but what we must also acknowledge is that the emissions continue to rise in spite of all the efforts, the Paris Agreement and things like that. One might say that the Paris Agreement failed 10 years ago, and with the current trends, we are going to heading towards maybe close to 3 Celsius or what is it, 5 Fahrenheit above the pre-industrial level by 2000 in 8 years from now. This is tremendous. The good news here is that renewable energy will continue to grow and cover some of this growth driven by electrification and the artificial intelligence. Of course, not only renewable energy, we expect growth in energy storage, in particular, critical raw materials needed for renewable energy and storage, things like rare earths, silicon, aluminum, copper, lithium, cobalt, graphite. However, in spite of really tremendous fall in prices and growth of renewable energy, it's absolutely clear that it cannot cover the entire demand. It's
especially not today.
Not today. Absolutely. So we need, as we saw maybe in this, if you are aware of this Spanish case of the blackout in Spain, what we really need, we need a reliable supply of high inertia and good power quality. And for that, we need essentially all options, all of the above, not only renewable energy, but gas, nuclear, anything that you can think of. Also, what is not so talked about is heat and the need for high quality residential industrial heat. And of course, we also need industrial feedstocks. So for all those reasons, we will need many things that go beyond the usual mantra, renewable energy will solve all problems. It is important, we need it, but not only that. In terms of the role of the US natural gas, I'm talking from European perspective. So we need it essentially for 3 things. Number one is we need US gas and US LNG to support Europe's energy security. I don't think I should really need to go deeper into this. It's quite clear why is it so. And this is
We've
going
said,
to be a long.
Branko, excuse me for interrupting, but I've said several times on this podcast that that LNG supply from the U.S. has been really crucial since the beginning of the Ukrainian
Yes,
situation with Russia. But we're not here to go into that. I understand that, but I just wanted to mention that that is a really important factor for Europe.
absolutely. This is critical factor. The Europe would be in a whole different situation, geopolitically, industrially, economically, if it wasn't for the US LNG. Admittedly, it's more expensive than the alternatives, but at this time there are no real alternatives. The
Right.
second reason why such US LNG is needed is what I said earlier about the renewable energy. We need, through synergies, a help to accelerate deployment of renewable energy. It cannot just go by itself. You need extra, and you maybe heard news from Germany when Germany is now maybe turning towards gas after many, you know, other options considered from domestic coal and lignite and nuclear and so on. But now the gas seems to be winning the game there in Germany. We will see. With the new government, I think that's the case. And finally, the gas from US is needed if we are to foster industrial recovery of Europe and use of gas not for heat or for its energy content, but as industrial feedstocks in case you need to produce things like polymers, fertilizers, a range of chemicals, ammonia, and whatnot. So for that, Europe is hoping to restart its industrial development, which got stuck for different and many reasons.
Mm.
I'll stop here.
Great. That's an excellent place to leave it. Well, you've given us a really nice insight into what's happening right now in terms of the energy mix. Um, let's move on now to the next question, which is, what does the UN group of experts on gas, what do you see as natural gas's role in the long-term energy mix, let's say beyond 2035? Um, because Europe and the world are going to need forms of energy that provide reliability and also reduce emissions. What role will natural gas have in that?
Well, first, thank you. First of all, the group of experts on gas recognizes that natural gas is what we call a bridge fuel uh, in a transition from high carbon fuels such as coal and liquid hydrocarbons to low carbon and renewable energy. However, now the length of this transition, whether it is what you've mentioned, 2035 and 2040 or even beyond, it is arbitrary. You know, we just set those dates, but how long this transition will take place, nobody really knows. I certainly do not.
And
Uh,
Franco,
yeah,
I picked that number in a somewhat arbitrary fashion because I agree with you that we really
yeah,
can't be sure what the unfolding is, especially as domestic policy and international policy change.
yeah. Yes, exactly. But as the group of experts on gas believes, as I said, that the natural gas or gases, what we use lately, will continue to be part of the primary energy supply of energy mixture for years to come. However, the group also recognizes that the natural gas is a fossil fuel. I know maybe the United States, there are initiatives to call it green and kind of hide the nature. Natural gas is a fossil fuel. There is no question about that. And what the group of experts on gas believes further is that what we use today needs to be progressively decarbonized as we go towards those dates that you've mentioned, 2040 or beyond. And European gas sector takes this very seriously. It's maybe not the case in the United States, but the European gas industry is very serious about decarbonization. There are several avenues of actions here, but I will mention two. Hydrogen is one where we, under this group of experts on gas, have a dedicated hydrogen task force that explores several things from classification of hydrogen as a product or hydrogen projects to developing and fostering hydrogen value chain, including fostering demand creation, which is really a problem. There are too many people producing hydrogen and very few who are willing to buy at the current market prices. The Hydrogen Task Force also investigates how the current gas infrastructure could be used to help accelerate hydrogen projects, whether it's blending, whether it's some other avenues. But generally, hydrogen is a way to decarbonize current gas. Especially this is the case when we go beyond energy in the so-called hard-to-abate sector, like metallurgy, production of polymers, of fertilizers, and so on, where we use carbon from gas as material, not really energy content, but something that will be built into the end product. And for this reason, for instance, our group of experts on gas in March, we have annual sessions in March, present a document that we provide several recommendations to our member states on how to establish a coherent hydrogen economy and based on inputs from many stakeholders. It's a bit complicated and I would say uncertain business. I don't know what will be end of this, but we are trying. So hydrogen is one. The second is biogas, and this is gaining traction lately. Also in March at the annual session, we discussed at length the role of biogas or biomethane in supporting sustainable development and sustainable development goals, if you're familiar with those 17 goals. And for many, biogas could be instrumental that goes, apply to many of those goals. So for this reason, we are sponsoring, together with the European Biogas Association, a declaration on biogas or biofuels also for COP30 that will be held in November in Brazil. We will see how it goes. So the previous COP, if you may recall, COP29 in Baku, there was a hydrogen declaration. Now the next one this year will be on biogas.
This episode is brought to you by the Natural Gas Supply Association, a DC-based trade association that represents domestic producers and marketers of natural gas. Natural gas stands out as a fuel of choice for America's energy future. It is affordable, reliable, and sustainable. Today, natural gas powers a growing share of industrial facilities, data centers, homes, and also supports the expansion of renewable energy. The benefits of natural gas rely not only on expanding our nation's energy infrastructure, like pipelines and storage facilities, but also ensuring regulatory certainty so businesses can construct and maintain this infrastructure. The Natural Gas Supply Association advocates for permitting reform to streamline the process for approving necessary infrastructure projects without compromising environmental protections. The natural gas sector has proven itself adaptable and resilient, meeting rising demand while maintaining affordability. By investing in infrastructure, embracing permitting reform, and fostering a fact-based regulatory environment, we can ensure that natural gas continues to be a reliable foundation for America's energy future. It is our responsibility to strengthen this foundation today so that we can meet the energy demands of tomorrow. Learn more by visiting www.ngsa.org.
Interesting. So you've raised an interesting question for me. I've thought about it for quite a while here. There is a way to produce hydrogen that is zero emissions. You use renewables to split the water and create the hydrogen. Biogas is carbon neutral because you are taking materials that would be sending carbon into the air and you're recycling it as fuel. I may not be explaining that exactly right, but either one of those doesn't necessarily use the infrastructure that has to be built to provide natural gas as power generation or as fuel. That means that the investments in the factories, the power plants, and the pipelines become sunk. They could be lost. It takes maybe 20, 30 years to pay off investments in those kinds of infrastructure factors. And yet, perhaps sooner than that, we'll be moving in with green hydrogen, with biofuels, with other uh, uh, options. Does the group of experts have concerns about sunk investments, and does it have ideas about best uses of natural gas investments protect against those kinds of sunk investments?
Well, a short answer to your question, not really. There is no concern that these investment in gas infrastructure, pipelines and storage and anything else will be a sunk investment, as you mentioned. The reason is quite simple. Those avenues of action that I mentioned, and you consider them as a threat, as you said, hydrogen, green hydrogen comes and squeezes out gas or biogas. They are still a very, very small fraction. I'm talking about less than 1% in the case of biogas and less than 0.1% in the case of hydrogen. So we are really, really far away that this will be replacing gas in any time soon. But the group of experts on gas has an interesting metaphor that we often use in our meetings, which is we see the future as an interplay of photons, electrons, and molecules. What does this mean? This means practically photons meaning renewable energy from solar and things like that, and maybe other electricity from hydro, but generally let's consider it clean. Electrons are wherever they come from, but definitely we're going to need a range of small molecules, molecules such as methane, hydrogen, methanol, ammonia, that carry energy, carry material, and are needed in the society, not only in the energy sector, but generally are needed. When you look at the statistics of production of ammonia or methanol, or even hydrogen, you don't see a downward turn. So they're going to be needed more and more. More of it, many of that are needed, for industry and for agriculture. So for these reasons, the group of experts on gas practically believes into two things. First, decarbonization is real and necessary. So it is happening and it is needed. And the second, we believe that the gas infrastructure will continue to be needed to produce, to transport, to pipe, to compress, to store progressively decarbonized gases. Now it's methane, and hopefully that will be progressively decarbonized in some future, but not so near future, what you mentioned. It possibly, we're talking about 50 plus years. Progressively decarbonized when practically this in going to a seamless beyond the life cycle of the current infrastructure, the development will happen.
Interesting.
So that's why I see a very low risk for what you say, sunk investments. And simply the world will continue to manage gases.
Interesting. Well, you've really answered the last question I had. This is the last question, and it really is about what you have observed yourself, or what the group of experts maybe has indicated about the competition, the economic competition, the feasibility competition of gases, clean hydrogen, and biofuels, but also natural gas against solar and wind plus batteries, and little commercialized technologies like fossil fuels with carbon capture and enhanced geothermal and advanced nuclear. Now, you've done a wonderful job of explaining how the world is going to need all these things, photons, electrons, and molecules. But is there anything else you can tell us in the way of guidance about how all these technologies will turn out in the mix? Or is it still too far off to really draw any legitimate conclusions?
Yeah, for some it's too far away, for some not. But to go, you remembered our first question, we decided there is a growth in energy consumption, electricity consumption, in material consumption. So this growth will, as I said earlier, will require involvement or a role for each of the technologies to play. The competition, if the cake is increasing, the competition is not so, if the space is expanding, it's not so critical. But as I earlier said, the group of experts on gas is not selfish in a way, if you like, unlike some other sectors that really tout only, say, nuclear or renewable energy, for their own reasons. I'm not criticizing them, I'm just saying. But the group of experts on gas of the UNEC believes that all those technologies you've mentioned will be needed, are needed, and will be needed with this growing demand. Of course, the PV, photovoltaic, and wind, the prices to produce will go down. This is great. This is up per kilowatt installed. And the installations will go up, and the sector will continue to grow. And as I mentioned, the same will apply to the support sector of energy storage for batteries, battery technologies, for pumped hydro, for geothermal, for heat pumps. One thing that you mentioned, and this is something that the United States Energy Association and UNEC did work together 10 years ago, is carbon capture, use, and storage. We did promote the enhanced oil recovery as a case study, so to speak, to wider deployment of carbon capture, use, and storage. However, since then, in the last 10 or 11 years, little progress has been achieved. There is some in Norway, indeed, Northern Lights, I believe it's the name of the project, but generally, we are not where we thought we would be. And the reason for this is quite simple. Oil and gas sector is already a very large industry, moving a lot of millions of tons of gases and liquids and so on. But the thing is, for each, say, 16 tons of methane that you burn, you produce 44 tons of CO2. Now, so in other words, the industry of taking care of the end of storage of waste management, so to speak, is 2.5 larger than the industry itself.
Wow.
So in other words, if you are to use tankers to ship CO2, you need 2.5 times as many tanker space as you currently use for LNG and oil and everything else.
Wow, that's a big challenge.
So for this reason, it's simply a bulky stuff. It's bulky. You literally drain oxygen out of thin air and put it, now you have to manage it, combined with sea. So it's an immense challenge, you know. If you do it on a small scale, then it doesn't really matter. But if you really want to do on a scale that will make a difference, I don't see how it will be done. Now, there are other issues with, you know, the so-called NIMBY, not in my backyard, where you put underground storage, there are many, many things. It's simply expensive, and it goes very slowly.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
So I was going to say we could leave it there. I think we've covered it, but I don't want you to cut you off. Did you want to finish up there? I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to mention one more thing. It's nuclear, also part of the mix. And
Yeah.
two technology that you mentioned that are coming is small modular reactors. To me, it's very appealing concept. Technically appealing, geopolitically appealing, because of how you could put it, you know, in and move away if need be. It provides a lot of flexibility. It goes well with renewable intermittent sources. However, it's complicated. For instance, it's not easy to export it. Even from the United States, you have many hurdles to go through, like the US 123 agreement, and so on and so on. And finally, the fusion reactors, if I may just mention for the end, we organized some years ago, or I helped organize a large fusion conference in Geneva, and I have seen that very little progress has been made since. So we are still years or decades away. I'll stop here.
Okay, good. Branko, that was a terrific summary. And you know what I take from that is the value of supporting experimentation in new technologies, see what the innovations can produce, or in some cases cannot produce. That's the way of science. And I think it's very encouraging, those things that you just described that maybe don't look practical right now, at least. But that's all the time we have. So I want to thank my guest, United Nations Group of Experts on Gas Secretary Branko Milicevic, for providing a global perspective of the world's evolving energy mix and natural gas's role in it. I also want to thank our sponsor, the Natural Gas Supply Association. And as always, I want to thank our listeners for taking the time to check out the USEA Power Sector Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with everybody you know our quest for energy transition solutions.